Hey guys, thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today we're going to go over Bitcoin a little bit more. Please subscribe to the channel if you guys like this content and turn your notifications on. So what we're going to look at today is, it's not going to be exactly the most intuitive, but I think the picture that it paints is quite informative. So what we're going to look at are the 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and 4 year ROIs for Bitcoin. So what that means is if you had bought Bitcoin and then sold it exactly 1 year later, this would have been your return on investment. And we show this here for the entirety of the price data that I have. Now note that the x-axis here, so time, only goes up to the end of 2018. This is because this would have been the ROI that you would have on Bitcoin had you bought it exactly 1 year ago. So 10 to the 0 means a 1x. So then 10 to the 1 is 10x. And then these little tick marks are 2x, 3x, 4x, 5x. And this would be 20, 30, 40, 50. And this would be 100 and then 200. So the point of the video is not to say you should buy and sell exactly 1 year apart or 2 years apart or anything like that. But I think there's some useful trends that we can get from this plot that we could use to help time entry and exit points as we move forward into the future with our investments into Bitcoin. So what we notice with Bitcoin is that we're essentially on a macro level. We're essentially the ROI, if you just buy and sell exactly 1 year later, it is decreasing. Now, 10 to the 1 means, so this would be a 10x, so here we're at 20x. That doesn't mean that you can never do 20x on your investment. It just means that if we were to follow this trend, then buying and selling exactly 1 year later would not net you 20x. Maybe if you buy and sell 2.5 years later, you can really ride the market. But the point is just to show you what your ROI would be exactly 1 year later. So you can see we more or less hold support in this region over here, which is around, it's between 0.1 and 0.2, which means you'd actually see somewhere say like an 80 to a 90% loss. So it's interesting, every time Bitcoin dies, we might see these 80 or 90%, mainly 80% losses or so. But you can see so far, continuing to just buy Bitcoin would continue to work out fairly well for you if you just hold on to it. So let's jump into the 2 year ROI. So this would be, what would you notice, or what would your expected return be holding on for 2 years or more? So in this case, you can see our support level, which we've only actually hit once. So I'm not really calling, it's not really a support level, it's just the lowest point on the graph is actually about 0.3. So it's better than what we saw on the last slide between 0.1 and 0.2. So this means that if you were to hold Bitcoin, if you bought Bitcoin at any given point in the history of Bitcoin and sold it 2 years later, there aren't really that many times where you would have been at a loss. So you would have been at a loss if you had bought near the end of 2013 and sold in the beginning of 2015. So remember, the ROI shown here is if you had bought it on this date and then sold it 2 years later. So you can see the period at which you would have been at a loss is not very long, only about a year. Now, we've also recently re-entered that period where you would be at a loss, but that doesn't mean now is not a good time to buy. It just means that if you had bought 2 years ago, you would be at a net loss right now, which is true. I mean, we're getting to the end of 2019, and if you remember, at the end of 2017 was when the Bitcoin bull run occurred, where it went up to almost $20,000 per coin. So because of that, we're expecting to see this this percent loss. It might be around this line. It could be 0.3, 0.4. And if we're say at a 50% loss with respect to the all-time high, then that would have, I think, sometime in mid December 2017, then Bitcoin would be at $10,000. If we were at say a 75% loss, then it would be at $5,000. And you can see that we're essentially going to be coming close to this line. We might not come all the way down to it, but these trends seem to they seem to repeat themselves in a sense in terms of where these lows are, as you can see on the prior chart with the 1 year return on investment. So this is interesting because you can see that for the 2 year we're in this channel here. So buying in say end of 2011 and selling 2 years later, you would have seen about a 300 or 400 ROI if you had then sold at the end of 2013. Here, if you had bought at the end of 2015, you would have seen about a, let's say, so 10, 20, 30, 40, about a 40x ROI if you had then sold at the end of 2017. So this curve here, it might do something where it comes down here and bounces, and it can do this even if Bitcoin more or less just stays at its current price or somewhere near there. It doesn't have to come all the way down to the line, but just because Bitcoin was going up to 20,000 2 years ago means that this has to drop unless Bitcoin in the very immediate future just shoots up to 20x, which I don't think many people think is going to happen, and I certainly don't think is going to happen. Now, if we were to continue these trends, so coming down, up, and then all the way down, back up, down, then that means that potentially we would like to see a bounce like this, meaning that if we could fast forward, say another 2 years, let's say we're fast forwarding to the end of 2021, then maybe we would be seeing a very decent ROI, and we'll be back up somewhere on this curve. Now that doesn't mean we're going to be at the peak over here. It doesn't mean we're going to have like say a 10x ROI between those 2 years, but I think there's good evidence to say that we will be bouncing up in a positive direction fairly soon in terms of seeing an ROI. And when I say soon, I don't mean the next month, okay? I mean like, over the course of the next year or two, I think we are going to see this this reversal. So what that would have meant would have meant that in say we see a bottom over here in first quarter of 2018, then that means that if you had bought in the first quarter of 2018 and you sold in say the first quarter of 2020, then you would have been at a loss because that's just what this indicates. But again, this is historical. This is we're having to think back a couple years to put these things in perspective. So remember, we're at the end of 2019. And our data on this chart won't be plotted for another 2 years. So where do you see this going? Where do you see this graph going? In 2 more years, you think we're going to be up higher on this curve, and maybe at a 5 to 6% and 5 to 6x increase on your investment, whatever it might be. So moving forward to a 3-year ROI. So this would be if you had bought Bitcoin and then held onto it exactly for 3 years and sold it. You can see that your ROI would have been a decent bit better. I mean, you would have been at a net loss only during this period over here. So you would have seen a net loss for a very small window if you had bought, say, at the end of 2013 and sold at the end of 2016. So basically, you would have been buying at the peak of the bull run in 2013 and then selling right before the amazing bull run of 2017. So what that tells me is that as long as you're not buying the peak, as long as we're not buying after a mania phase, your 3-year ROI is going to be most likely a good investment. Just try avoid buying at the peaks, try avoid being dumb money, be the smart money. Buy when the market is not in a mania phase, buy when the news is not talking about Bitcoin every day, etc. One of the things you'll see people say is, and I hear it all the time, is that you can't use the history to predict the future, and that's true. But it doesn't mean you can't use the past market to inform your decisions. For instance, if this chart were completely down here, so 10 to the 1 again is 0.1, so it means you're at a 90% loss. If your 3-year ROI on Bitcoin was just a line that was around 0.1, that means you're essentially at a 90% loss. If it were just like that for the entirety of the entire 2010 to 2020, clearly people would not be wanting to buy it because it's not showing a good ROI. The point is that if you had bought Bitcoin and held on to it for 3 years, at any given point in its history of being around, except for the small window over here, you would be at a net positive ROI, except for if you had bought right here or maybe as it dipped right there. Otherwise, you're likely looking at least 10x for most of it, and between say 2 to 10x for this portion over here. And again, buying in this region would have been quite strange to be buying into Bitcoin when it was doing really well, and then selling, right before, as it was, or right before it was about to take off. Here's the 4-year ROI. So this is for the people who like to think about those 4-year market cycles, and assuming we are on one, which I'm definitely not saying that we are, but if you were to have bought Bitcoin and sold it exactly 4 years later, you can see that you would actually be doing quite well. I mean, it's simple to say that you would have not seen a net loss, period. You would, for the most part, so 10 to the 0 again would be a 1x ROI. So basically, you're pulling out what you put in, which actually would be a kind of a net loss if you include inflation in that. But you can see that the lowest, if you had cashed out at the worst possible time 4 years later, you still would have been up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5x. You still would have been up 5x if you had just held Bitcoin for 4 years. If you didn't even care about the market cycles, you don't even look at it, you just say, I'm buying Bitcoin today, I'm going to sell it for 4 years from now, you would have still been at a 5x ROI. For the most part, you would have actually been above 10x. You can see that we've essentially held support at around 10x for many of these drop downs here. We basically go in near where 10x is, and clearly that doesn't mean we're always going to have a 10x ROI on Bitcoin. Eventually, I imagine it would have to stabilize some, but that doesn't mean it's going to, it's not going to just drop. It's most likely not going to just drop to 0 tomorrow. Now, I mean, if there's a breakthrough in quantum computing and all of a sudden someone can get your private keys, then yeah, you can imagine that the price might do something catastrophic. But assuming something like notwithstanding something like that, it makes sense to me to continue to think that your 4-year ROI is still going to be a several x multiplier. So basically, that would mean if you bought, say, early 2018 and sold early 2023 or 2022, you would be doing quite well. And that's more or less the point of this video. And then here I just put all of them on the graph. You can see how each ROI. You can see this is the 1 year, the 2 year, the 3 year, and as you hold on to Bitcoin longer and longer, then your potential ROI just increases. I mean, if you're a short-term trader, that's great for you. If you can make money, that's awesome. But if you're more, if trading is now your full-time thing, if you have a full-time job, I have a full-time job. If you're just looking for good times to enter the market and exit the market, follow the long-term momentum shifts. Follow when we're in mania phases. When people, when all of your friends are asking how they can buy Bitcoin, that's when you want to be selling. And it can be very easy to get lost in those phases and to assume that it's just going to go up forever. But prices of these volatile assets do not increase monotonically forever. It's just not what they do. They're speculative and they're riddled with bubbles. And you either become, usually when you start out, you're the dumb money, and you either continue to be the dumb money in the market and continue to lose your hard-earned money, or you learn from your mistakes and you become the smart money. It's a fairly simple concept. It's just sticking to your principles, not worrying about daily price action, but looking at the long-term picture. Remember, these 1, 2, 3, 4-year ROIs are not specifically what you might get if you were to, say, buy during the pits of the bear market and then sell at the peak of the bull market. I mean, I would like to think that if we had bought at, say, 3,100, that we might still be able to see, which I did buy at 3,100 or maybe 32 or 3,300. I would like to think that we're still capable of seeing a 30x or 40x ROI in the next bull run. It just means that timing it is going to be the most critical thing. And what I'm doing now for everyone who watches my videos is I'm trying to put together as many tools as possible that we can use to determine where our entry and exit points are. Now, each of these tools is not supposed to be completely predictive, and some things I put together might have slightly different predictions, but the point is if we can compile all these tools into one, say, report, which I'm thinking about doing, let me know if you guys think that would be valuable. If compiling all of these charts into one report and interpreting the data, investigating the data to try to see what is the primary conclusion that everything is telling us. What can we learn from, like, say, the logarithmic regression bands? What can we learn from, like, that primary logarithmic regression curve, which shows where the best time to buy Bitcoin would have historically been? What about tokens traded? What about looking at that metric? What about your 4-year, your 3-year, your 2-year, and your 1-year ROI? So if you can imagine, if we were to go back to, say, your 1-year ROI, if we were to hold this level as resistance in the next run, you can imagine that this might only be, say, a 10x. Now that means that if, say, let's say December of 2022, Bitcoin is $100,000. Let's just pretend like it is. Then that means that and if we're at a 10x ROI, then that means that a year before, that Bitcoin would have been at $10,000. So that would have been 10x had you bought it a year before. But if you buy it, say, a year and 3 months before, maybe you're at 20x. Or if you bought it, say, 3 years and 2 months before, maybe you're at 30x. But the point is when we get to that phase of the market cycle, let's say Bitcoin does reach $100,000, and we're all looking at these charts and we're saying, okay, well, Bitcoin a year ago was 10 grand, now it's 100 grand, and we are at this this line here that has proven to be resistance 3 times. Let's assume, I think it'd be safe to say, let's assume that it might hold resistance a 4th time. So because of that, let's start dollar cost averaging out. Let's sell 20% today. Let's sell 20% in 3 days. Let's sell another 20% in a couple weeks, and let's make the most of our investment. Again, this is not financial advice, but I mean that's kind of how I do things. And I think there's a good chance that many of you do this, and if not, then please subscribe to the channel. I will be showing these updated charts. I'm not just going to post these videos and then never talk about these charts again. We will be doing periodic updates where we go through each and every one of these charts to see, okay, is it time to start thinking about selling? We want to keep a level head. We don't want to get too greedy. We want to make the most on our long-term investments. So please consider these facets of investing in Bitcoin. Remember that just holding for 4 years, if anything, is most likely going to work out well for you. For instance, if this is the only YouTube video you're going to watch of mine, and you don't really want to think about Bitcoin, you're really not that into cryptocurrency or something, and you want to take a shot in the dark. And you're going to say, okay, I'm going to buy Bitcoin today, and maybe I want to sell it in this amount of time. I mean, historically, had you sold it 4 years later, you would have been seeing a several X multiplier in your investment, which would definitively beat most other markets. I mean, in most other markets, maybe if you're lucky, you're seeing 12%, or if you're really good, you're seeing more than that. You're not seeing on average, the returns you'd be seeing in the cryptocurrency market. So it's a speculative market for sure, but you need to be smart with your investments, and you need to be you need to have some level of resolve about your investments and not let those daily fluctuations get to you. If anything, if you think about it from the perspective of, we know, or we think that Bitcoin is going up on a good run in the next 2 or 3 years, based off what all the data has told us in the past. If you think that, then a short-term drop would actually be beneficial, because it just means you're getting it at a discount. If Bitcoin were to drop to, say, $4,000, I mean, why sweat it? I mean, well, if you're overexposed, if you have invested too much money into Bitcoin and you can't afford it, then yeah, that would be a problem. So the primary things are: don't invest more than you can afford to lose. Hold the private keys, otherwise, not your keys, not your crypto. And just be patient. I mean, if you're patient in the market, historically your investment would have done well. So I think that pretty much covers what I want to talk about in this video. I just wanted to go over these 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, and 4 year ROIs to get your guys' thoughts on this type of content. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, turn your notifications on, and like the video. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Bye.